Hello and welcome into the first ever edition of Around the ACC, a weekly production of Tech Sideline, where we'll take an in-depth look into the conference each week and bring you the latest news around the league. You can take in the show on the Tech Sideline YouTube channel, and while you're there, make sure to like and subscribe. Today we record on Thursday, December 9th, and in this episode we'll break down current standings, get power rankings from the crew, preview the best upcoming matchups, and much more. Stay with us here on Around the ACC, which starts right now. Well, with any new show, we want to give some background into the crew, so I'm very excited to introduce the two that'll be joining me throughout this series. First, we have David Cunningham, who you may know as the managing editor of TechSideline.com, and Giovanni Heater, current freshman in Virginia Tech's SMA program. Malcolm Stewart producing behind the scenes, and of course, I'm your host, Katie Adams, a junior in the SMA program. But if there's one thing about me, it's that football is my first love, and my basketball expertise is not there. So I'm excited to learn from these two as we break down this show. But this is going to be a primarily basketball-based show, but let's face it, there's a lot going on in the ACC right now, football-wise. There's going to be 4 out of 7 new coaches in the Coastal next year, one of those being Mario Cristobal in Miami. Let's start with you, Gio. How do you feel about the way Manny Diaz was treated on the way out?
Well, it's a unique situation, right? Because you have it where Manny Diaz was kind of not told that he was going to be leaving before there was a new hire, and they kind of overlapped. Whether he knew it or not, it wasn't publicly announced that they were parting ways with Manny Diaz before that they said they were hiring Mario Cristobal. So there was kind of a weird overlap there. It almost kind of reminds you of back in the day when Virginia Tech parted ways with Seth Greenberg, right? He finds out through the media, and that's kind of the same feel that it had. With that being said, it's unfortunate just because Manny Diaz is a Miami guy through and through. For so long they thought like that was going to be their guy, that was going to be what was going to bring Miami back after Mark Richt left. Do I think he's treated unfairly? It's tough to say because we don't know what happened behind closed doors. We don't know how long he actually knew when the athletic director, told him that he was going to be no longer the head coach at Miami. So it's kind of tough to say with that, but it did get into a little bit of a jungle when it came to the media throughout all that.
Yeah, definitely. Now, David, Virginia looked like they were possibly closing in on Anthony Poindexter to be their new coach. Then it looked like it was going to be Tony Elliott. Now maybe Josh Gaddis. But whoever gets this job, there's certainly going to be some new juice in that Commonwealth Clash rivalry next November.
Yeah, well, especially with Brent Pry, a new head coach of Virginia Tech. And the day that Brent Pry's announced, Virginia announces that the Bronco Mendenhall announced that he was going to resign after the bowl game. So a lot of chaos. Like you said, 4 of the 7 teams in the Coastal are going to have new head coaches. It could have been 5 if Jeff Collins at Georgia Tech was fired. But this Virginia program, Carla Williams, the athletic director, has created a fundraising campaign similar to, as Tech fans would know, the Reach for Excellence campaign. But for whatever reason, Virginia fans, haven't really been willing to donate a lot of money like the Tech fans have. And so I think there's a lot of there are probably a lot of different reasons behind the scenes why Anthony Poindexter or Tony Elliott haven't necessarily come to an agreement yet. It's taken UVA a while, and as we record on December 9th, we are less than a week away from National Signing Day, and Virginia Tech. We thought Virginia Tech was going to be in a little bit of a crunch, with getting rid of a coach, 3 or 4 weeks before. Virginia doesn't have a coach, and we're less than a week away. So there's definitely a lot going on. As we record at 4 o'clock today, Yahoo's Pete Thamel said that Tony Elliott is basically deciding between Virginia, Duke, and being the offensive coordinator of Clemson. So there's a lot that's going into this situation. It seems like Anthony Poindexter is going to stay at Penn State, but definitely that's what Coastal Chaos is, I guess.
Yep, gotta love it. We also had an ACC championship game this past weekend, and it was a matchup that no one really expected. If you would have said at the beginning of the year that Wake Forest was going to be taking on Pitt in this year's ACC championship, I think a lot of people would have looked at you like you were crazy, but Pitt ends up taking it home in their first ACC championship game ever. So really great for them and their program. Really great for Kenny Pickett, who solidified himself as a New York Heisman Trophy finalist with that game, and want to get both of you all's opinions really on if he deserves to be a Heisman Trophy candidate, if you think he's going to win, anything like that.
Absolutely. I think without a doubt he deserves to be a candidate. Do I think he's going to win it? Unfortunately, I think Bryce Young is going to win it. or Hutchinson from Michigan. I mean, that's kind of that feel good. You want that defensive player to win it. Nobody has since Charles Woodson. You had Manti Te'o as a finalist, but other than that, it's an offensive award essentially. But to see Kenny Pickett in there representing the ACC, I mean, are you kidding me? It doesn't get better than that, especially coming from Pitt. It kind of came as a surprise to everybody. It's exciting. I think it's good for Pitt without a doubt. It's good for the ACC. I think Bryce Young takes it, especially because he's playing in the college football playoff. His performance against Georgia in the SEC championship was incredibly elite, and he kind of solidified himself. But I do hope Kenny Pickett wins it, because I think that would be the most elite Heisman moment ever with the fake slide, even though that's probably going to get outlawed in college football. I mean, I remember watching that live. I was watching it with a buddy of mine who's from Pittsburgh. He's going nuts. I mean, that was one of the craziest plays I've seen. So Kenny Pickett's electrifying. He's fun to watch. He took college football in the ACC by storm this year. So it's really cool to see them in a New Year's Six Bowl representing the ACC, and just to see him there, to have an ACC guy there, especially coming from Pitt.
Yeah, I think it's kind of crazy to think about where Pat Narduzzi is kind of taking this program, because Pitt, like everybody else in the ACC Coastal, Pitt's had up and downs, and Narduzzi and Mac Brown are the two coaches in the Coastal that are not on the hot seat this offseason, which is kind of crazy to believe. But yeah, I think Kenny Pickett does deserve to be up there. I think there are some other names like Will Anderson from Alabama, you could probably say, also probably deserves to be up there. But I think Kenny Pickett is definitely very deserving of that stage. I mean, the amount of records and he broke at at Pittsburgh, broke former Miami Dolphins quarterback Dan Marino's records, and that's a name that everybody knows. Pickett's done some unbelievable things. Best quarterback in the ACC in a really good quarterback conference. You got Brennan Armstrong, Sam Howell, Sam Hartman. I mean, this is a quarterback that stood out over everybody. And like Gio said, I don't think he's going to win. I think Hutchinson or Young will probably win it, but he's definitely deserving. And that fake slide was that was something. I think everybody was kind of like, I didn't realize you could do that, but definitely very entertaining. And he'll be honored this week, this Saturday, getting up to go to New York and enjoy the Heisman ceremony. Even if he doesn't win it, that's a really cool experience, and definitely very deserving moment for him.
It's rare that there's moments anymore. I guess I've only been on the earth 18 years, but I'm watching sports. It's so rare that a moment shocks me to the point where I'm like, wow, I've actually never seen that before. I've never seen a fake slide before. That was exciting. That was a play that I've never seen happen before in football. Then he takes it to the house. And then RG3's call on it when they showed the highlight. First it was Mark Jones with a great call, and of course I look at it from a play-by-play lens. Had an elite call on it, but then RG3 was really funny with it. He had a lot of fun with it. So just to see that, it was a very cool moment.
Yeah, well, there's one final game for a lot of these ACC teams. It's bowl season, and those matchups were announced this past Sunday. Which games stand out to you guys the most?
So I'm interested in the Sun Bowl, and I know you guys were questioning me. This is Miami, Washington State, and one of the reasons why it intrigues me so much is because these are two 7-5 teams, and both of them don't have the coaches they started the season with. Obviously, we already talked about Manny Diaz. Manny Diaz is out at Miami, and Washington State had the whole COVID fiasco, and that was way back in September. They're both 7-5 teams. I mean, they were both second or third in their division, and everybody's kind of looking around going, what the heck, because they don't have a coach. But I'm really interested because there's two really good quarterbacks too. Tyler Van Dyke, as we all know, from Miami, he's only a true freshman, but he really impressed. And then Jalen DeLora is the Washington State quarterback, and he put up some pretty good numbers this season. And it's in El Paso. It's on CBS. It's the only bowl game that's on CBS, which I always enjoy watching games on CBS. So I think all around it's just going to be really interesting. I love a little bit of chaos. So watching two teams play without their head coaches that they started the season with, I think is kind of cool.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be that guy that's going to say, oh, the big trademark game. Of course, that's what I'm going to talk about. But how could you not love this matchup, Pittsburgh versus Michigan State in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl? I mean, Michigan State's been a fun team to follow all year, as has Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, obviously, we just talked about it. Pat Narduzzi, Kenny Pickett, they've surprised. They have an elite wide receiving core. Their defense has kind of progressively improved, especially in stopping the run. They shut down Sean Tucker at Syracuse. They shut down Virginia Tech's rushing attack. And then they did it again in the ACC Championship. Wake Forest couldn't really do much offensively at all, but they especially couldn't run the football. So I think Pittsburgh's improved there. I'm really interested to see that matchup, this Pittsburgh run defense, which they're not the strongest defense, like I said, but that is their strong suit against Kenneth Walker, who's one of the most elite running backs in college football. Arguably, I'd say the most elite running back in college football. So he's explosive against that run defense. Going to be exciting. Michigan State offensively is going to be exciting to watch. Pitt offensively is going to be exciting to watch. You're talking about two coaches that are on the ballot for Coach of the Year. Will either one of them win it? I don't think so. But you're talking about two coaches that really surprised this year and took their teams to levels that I don't think anybody thought that they could get to with Michigan State and Pitt. So I'm just excited to watch this game. It's a New Year's Six Bowl. Michigan State hasn't been in New Year's Six Bowl in a couple of years. They kind of fell off a little bit after their college football playoff appearance back in, I want to say, 2015 or 16. And obviously Pittsburgh, it's new territory for them as well. So this is an exciting matchup on December 30th down in Atlanta.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to double down on the Peach Bowl. Really excited for Pat Narduzzi to take on his old team. He used to be a coach at Michigan State, so that'll be a fun matchup. And excited to see how Pitt represents the ACC in this game because, frankly, Clemson is the only team that has a lot of they have gone to New Year's Six Bowls frequently.
I guess them in Florida State, the one time. So
right.
This is new territory for the ACC as a whole.
So it'd be great for Pitt to get the win there. Also, the Duke's Mayo Bowl is one that I'm super excited about. Sam Howell could possibly be his last game in a North Carolina uniform, and Shane Beamer has just had an incredible season, starting to turn around the South Carolina program and making a bowl in his first year. So really great for them. I think that'll be a great matchup. But we're going to transition on to basketball here and get into the ACC standings. Now this is going to change drastically throughout the season as the season progresses. But gentlemen, at first glance, what are your initial thoughts?
You want to take it first, David?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think as we were talking about before we went on air, the ACC's kind of a down conference this year. In past years, the ACC's been the cream of the crop. I mean, back a couple years ago when Zion Williamson, RJ Barrett, and Cam Reddish were on that Duke team, and they didn't make it past the Elite Eight because they lost to Michigan State, but they were good. Virginia Tech had its Sweet 16 team. There was a lot of talent, whether it was young or old, and just over the last few seasons, it's just. Duke is clearly, I think, up top, maybe North Carolina too, but I think everybody else, it's more of a even playing field this year. And I guess it makes it a little bit more interesting if you're an ACC basketball fan, but it's also like, I don't know if there's necessarily anybody outside of Duke and North Carolina that can go win a national title. You know what I mean? Yeah, no,
I'm right there with you. And, you hit the nail right on the head. The ACC is down this year, and down bad, as kids would say these days. Like, the ACC is just not what it usually is. I think it's Duke, and then, tier number 2 would be North Carolina, and then everybody else. And that's not what we thought it was going to be, but Virginia's down. Virginia Tech really hasn't been what people thought that they were going to be. Florida State hasn't been what people thought that they were going to be. Then you have a team like Wake Forest, who historically has struggled the last 10 years, and now they're having themselves a really nice start to the season at 8-1. So the standings are definitely really jumbled right now. You see Duke sitting at 8. And that's just because you had one conference game that happened so far, and Duke didn't play a conference game so far. They were the only team not to because of the 15 different teams. So basically anybody that won is at the top half, and anybody that lost is at the bottom half, and Duke's sitting right in the middle. So it's really early to talk about the standings. The standings would be a little bit easier to look at before we played the one ACC game. And then, we're going to get a couple more games under our belt, and 2 or 3 weeks from now when we talk about it again, it'll be more of a better picture. But, this doesn't really reflect what the ACC truly looks like right now, especially with Duke sitting at 8 and, teams like Boston College and Miami towards the top.
I will say it's interesting to look up there and see how many teams have 3 and 4 losses. It's over half the ACC.
Yeah.
And that just shows that either teams are playing really, really good non-conference opponents, which some of them are. Obviously the Big Ten ACC Challenge, and some teams travel and play good non-conference games. But just in general, the ACC is not what it usually is.
Yeah, you're right there. Like, the ACC, not everybody, but a lot of teams challenge themselves a little bit extra this year. You talked about Mike Young, worrying if he bit off more than he could chew when he talked about it on Tech Talk Live the other night with his non-conference schedule, and a lot of teams kind of took that same approach. Syracuse has played some dogs. They had to play Auburn when they went to the Battle for Atlantis, and they had to, in the same tournament, they could have matched up against Baylor, and then they had to go play Villanova at the Garden the other night. And then you look at what Duke did to load their non-conference, and you look at what Florida State did to load their non-conference, and you look at what Virginia did. And, every single team in the ACC, for the most part, Notre Dame even had a couple of tough games, and yeah, they lost them. That's why they sit at 3-4. But they had tough games. So the ACC challenged themselves in the non-conference, to say the least.
Yeah, moving into recent big games and outcomes, there's 5 I want to touch on, but first I want to talk about the ACC Big Ten Challenge briefly, which is something that the ACC has struggled with for several years in a row now. They dropped this one for maybe the 4th year in a row. They haven't won it since 2017, so Big Ten took this one 8-6. Initial thoughts on that?
Well, if for those who are keeping up with just the record, because it was 7-6, Big Ten won, but it was like 6-0, 6-1, or maybe I think it was 6-2 going into the second day of it, because the ACC just had a terrible showing the first day, and then 4 or 5 teams in a row won, and the ACC barely lost. But I think it just shows in general that the Big Ten is better top to bottom than the ACC is. Virginia Tech got a win on the road, but you see teams like Duke. Duke was up against Ohio State and loses down the stretch. North Carolina blew up Michigan, but teams like Michigan State beat Louisville, and I think just in general it shows that the Big Ten has more depth in terms of teams, and I'm sure you'll probably see 8, 9, 10 Big Ten tournament teams, in the big dance come March.
I think that everybody in the ACC, as far as fandom goes, except probably our friends in Durham, are going to appreciate this. But Duke choked because we could have tied it up and they had to lose to Ohio State. But, it was a great showing the second day. But this has been a situation that when this started, like 20 years ago or however long ago it started, at first it was dominated by the ACC, and like the last 5 or 6 years, it has been completely taken over by the Big Ten. And like you look at the Big Ten last year, and they had like 6 teams in the top 10 at one point towards the end of the season. Like the Big Ten has emerged as what I believe is the best conference in college basketball. And honestly, I don't even know if it's that close. And I think the ACC has fallen to maybe the 5th best conference. I mean, I think the Big Ten's there. Then I think you probably have the Big 12, and then you probably have the Big East, honestly, with Villanova in there and Seton Hall. I mean, they're in the top 25. And then maybe it comes down to the Pac-12 and the ACC. Probably the ACC over the Pac-12, but it's just interesting. The Big Ten is so good, and yeah, it was a good showing the second day, but Duke definitely blew an opportunity to go 500 for the ACC.
Yeah, getting into this 5-game slate, first game I want to talk about is Wake Forest at Virginia Tech. Wake wins 80-61, shocks a sold-out Castle Coliseum, and kind of embarrasses Virginia Tech.
Yeah, it was a poor showing from Virginia Tech. They bounced back. Hokies bounced back on Wednesday night against Cornell, but just a really poor defensive performance. I mean, Hokies let Wake Forest shoot 65% from the field, and anytime you let a team shoot 50%, it's one thing. Anytime you let a team shoot 65%. Those games are extremely difficult to win. So Hokies start, for the first time in the Mike Young era, start 0-1 in the ACC. But this Wake Forest team, I think, is really talented. Steve Forbes brought in Alondes Williams and Jake LaRavia in the transfer portal. And, I mean, these guys are the real deal, especially after such a tough season last year in Steve Forbes' first season in the ACC.
I think here's the problem, too. And I said it when we played Memphis, or when Virginia Tech played Memphis, I should say. And it's just kind of carried on throughout. I think anytime they play a team that's taller than them, they're going to struggle because they do have a size disadvantage pretty much across the board. You got Keve Aluma playing the 5. He's 6'9". I mean, that's just a little bit undersized. Even Mike Young has said in press conferences and on Tech Talk Live before that he's really a power forward. I mean, he has the body and the shape and the size and the skill set of a good power forward, but he's kind of forced to play the 5 because they don't have a true center. So no matter what, as good as Keve is, he kind of got bullied on the inside against Memphis and against Wake Forest. And where his scoring production, even though he had a great game, it came from shooting from beyond the arc and with those post-fade type hook shots that he likes to go and let fly from, around the elbow free throw line area. He really struggled inside the paint, especially with that big body down low. So that's tough to see, and I just think across the board, anytime Virginia Tech's going to play a taller team in the ACC, they're going to struggle unless they continue to try and find answers, because the rebound category started to get away from them as well significantly, and second chance points against Memphis and against Wake Forest. And I know I keep going back to that Memphis game, but they're a really tall team. I mean, it just showed.
Yeah, Louisville and NC State. Louisville wins at 73-68. NC State needs to get it together because they've got the Boilermakers on deck.
Yeah, Purdue is maybe the best team in the country. I mean, Purdue has my vote for the number one team in the country. I watched Purdue wallop Florida State, but but this NC State Louisville game was interesting. It was a lot closer. I guess it was as close as the statistics indicated. I mean, it was a pretty even shooting night for the most part. But I mean, Louisville was up 14 at half, and that was really the difference in the game. Just got out to a quick start in that first half, and Louisville lost a couple of talented guys after last season's end, but I do think that this is a Louisville team that could compete for the top of the ACC if it can find its groove. But NC State, like you said, Katie, Purdue on deck, doesn't really get much easier. They come to Blacksburg in the first couple of weeks of January. So this is an NC State team led by Darian Sebron, who we'll talk about in a little bit, but they're talented. They did lose a couple of big players, Manny Bates, in the offseason, but that just, I think, give you a little bit of a glimpse of what those 4 through 8 teams in the ACC could look like down the stretch.
Yeah, here's the thing about this game too. Like, it's so early and it's such a close game. Anything within 5, I mean, it's a coin flip this early in the season. I mean, I don't think NC State or Louisville are going to struggle. I think with this weak ACC, they're definitely towards the top of this, the top 8-ish, top 6-ish, definitely the top half of the ACC. So it's so early to tell how much of an impact this is really going to have, but it's definitely a good win for Louisville, especially because it was at PNC Arena on the road at NC State. But Darian Sebron really is what stood out to me, despite the loss. He's been incredibly impressive.
Yeah, next we got UNC and Michigan. UNC takes this one 72-51 and really put on a show in the second half. This is a game that I did watch, and I will say there was a lot of shoe game on the court because this was a battle of the Jordan logo, but UNC definitely coming out hot under Coach.
I think North Carolina is a team this year that is going to be really interesting to watch because, like you said, it is Hubert Davis's first season, and I mean, replacing a legend is always so difficult. Replacing Roy Williams, college basketball legend, not just North Carolina legends, is even more difficult. But they really came out and gave it to Michigan in the second half. 58% shooting from the floor in those final 20 minutes. Michigan's no slouch. I don't know if Michigan is going to be, top 2 or 3 team in the Big Ten, but Michigan's going to be in the top half and they'll be a tournament team. So very impressive win for North Carolina, especially when you beat Michigan by 21. I mean, that's a huge game, but they really did it in the second half.
Yeah, I was really excited for this game, and I was actually most excited for this game when you looked at all of the Big Ten ACC matchups. This was the one that stood out to me most, besides probably Duke and Ohio State. And I thought Michigan was going to be better. I really like Juwan Howard there and that kind of idea. They're kind of almost pulling the Deion Sanders approach. Like, that's a guy that can recruit, without a doubt. And Michigan's going to be one of the top recruiting college basketball teams for a while to come, especially in the early going. But, not to take anything away from North Carolina, like, they came out and balled. And they impressed, and they cemented themselves as one of the best teams in the ACC, up there with Duke. Like I said, I think it's Duke and North Carolina right now. And it was an impressive win. It wasn't a win I expected because if you look at North Carolina's schedule, they dropped some duds, especially when they went, for the Thanksgiving tournament. So it was just good to see North Carolina ball out in the Dean Smith Center and straight up put on a show because I think UNC kind of redeemed themselves a little bit, and it was a huge win for Hubert Davis as well.
Mm-hmm. Syracuse and Villanova next. Historically, a great rivalry, but Villanova just a little too much for the Orange in this one. They take it 67-53.
Yeah, no, it was a close game until a couple minutes left, and then the Wildcats went on a 12-2 run, and the game just slipped away. And Gio's over here shaking his head because he's from Syracuse, but Villanova, Colin Gillespie, this is a really talented Villanova team, number 6 in the country. Syracuse has had its ebbs and flows this season. Obviously, Jim Boeheim with his two of his sons, Buddy and Jimmy. Buddy Boeheim has been up and down scoring recently, and it's been really interesting to watch. Jimmy's found his stroke, but just the way that Syracuse, plays some of these games. I mean, they lost to Colgate and gave up over 100, but then get some big wins. They had a win in the Big Ten ACC Challenge. So it's interesting to watch Syracuse. This was a game that, you can't – I don't think you can be mad about losing to Villanova. Obviously frustrating considering the rivalry, but this is a really, really talented Villanova team that could contend for a national championship.
I mean – okay, I love Syracuse, and you guys know that. But
put it out there. Make it known.
No, they are terrible. I mean, they are just, terrible. Like, the worst that they've been in a minute. And it's progressively gotten worse. And I don't mean that to, come out and just trash Syracuse, but the first half shouldn't even have been close at all. Villanova shot, 20% from the field, and they went something like 4 for 24 from beyond the arc. The first half shouldn't have been close at all. Villanova just literally could not buy a bucket. And they were even getting open looks. They just simply weren't hitting. And Syracuse still only had a 2 or 3 point lead at halftime. The defense just isn't there. They don't have the athletes defensively. They can't score offensively. It's just, as a fan, it's frustrating to watch them. But looking at the landscape of the ACC, I just struggle to look at their schedule and find where they're going to get wins. Because they're not that good of a team right now, and Syracuse has progressively just kind of gone like this. When you think about the first year they joined the ACC in 2014, they were number 1 in the country. They went 25-0 to start the season. I mean, they were literally the best team in the country that season, and the recruiting class was incredible. They had Tyler Ennis, who was one of the best freshmen in the nation, and went to be a top pick in the NBA draft, and then it just has completely fallen off. And that's partially due to Mike Hopkins going to be the head coach at Washington. He's their best recruiter by far. And there's other reasons as well. You had the recruiting sanctions and whatnot. But, it's a program that has gone like this. And the ACC is tougher, but the Big East was just as hard too. So as a fan and just an observer from the outside, Syracuse is going to struggle. I mean, they lost to VCU. They got beat by 15 to Colgate at home. And let them score 100 points, and then they struggled to score against Villanova as well.
Now, this last game, probably the biggest shock of them all. UVA travels to Harrisonburg and takes on JMU. They lose that one, 52-49. Dukes fans storm the court, and they take advantage of this UVA team in a down year.
First, credit Tony Bennett for playing this game. Tony Bennett was asked why would you go play JMU post game, and he said because when he was at Wisconsin Green Bay, where he was a player, the Marquettes, the Wisconsins, didn't want to go play his team. So he was like, no, I'm going to make an effort to go play, in-state teams that are not in the power leagues. JMU, George Mason, Old Dominion, those teams. And to JMU's credit, JMU played well and beat them. The Duke shot 47%. Virginia 14 first half points. I mean, that gives me flashbacks from the Virginia Tech NC State game from a couple years ago. Yeah. Just a terrible scoring game. But this team for Virginia, Tony Bennett does not have a great team just because there's not a lot of talent. I mean, he's got Kihei Clark. He brought in Jaden Gardner, but just overall, it's a really young team. And yeah, they've got Kihei and Jaden, but outside of that, they don't really have anybody that can score at will. And I think it's a little bit frustrating to watch if you're a Virginia fan, just because so used to, having really, really talented teams. I mean, last year Virginia was one of the best teams in the ACC, and the Cavaliers have really fallen off, and they're sitting at 6-4 right now. And that's not something you usually see from a Virginia team, but it's going to be really interesting to watch how Tony Bennett handles everything going down the stretch, starting the ACC play, simply because they haven't been in this position where they're behind the 8 ball many times at all recently. They've always been a good team under him in the ACC.
Yeah, and I think the thing they're missing too is a big man, but they got to get Reese Beekman going. I mean, he's one of the better players, and they've struggled with that. But I just think they're probably the biggest downfall or disappointment in the ACC, considering where they were projected to be, and kind of where they've played out, and they've struggled against, teams that they should be beating. I mean, even Pittsburgh, they barely scraped out of that game, and it was in Charlottesville, and Pittsburgh came out and honestly blew that game. They were up by 4 with, what was it, David, 20 seconds left or something like that. And, UVA ends up letting that one, or Pitt ends up letting that one slip. UVA comes away with crazy win in that game. But going to JMU, I don't care what it is. Like, as a Syracuse fan, they lose to Colgate. Like, there's no excuses. Like, that's supposed to be your little brother in the state, and you're supposed to win those games. You're the big power school, and if for Virginia, like, there's no excuses. Like, you're playing JMU, you need to win that game. Otherwise, you're never going to survive in the ACC. And, everyone has an off year, everyone has an off game, but I think UVA is definitely the biggest disappointment.
Yeah, David, you talk about crediting Tony Bennett for playing this game. Something he probably wasn't expecting going into this game was having profanities yelled at him from the JMU fans, which I believe I saw on Twitter they were cursing at him during the game for whatever reason.
Yeah, they were saying, like, chanting F Tony Bennett, which is not something you usually see, because as somebody who's had a chance to talk to Tony Bennett many times, I mean, he's such a classy guy, really nice guy. Even people at Virginia Tech, I think, they don't like him, but they respect him just because of the job he's done. But yeah, very strange to just see that. But but the JMU fans getting a chance to rush the court and everything. I mean, that was really cool, just because how many times you get to do that against your in-state rival. You know?
So JMU fans, take this next win with some grace, but overall, it was a great win. This next segment I'm very excited about. It's called Trending Up and Trending Down. So we'll kind of alternate. David and Gio will pick either a fan base or a player or a coach who they think is trending up or trending down in the ACC this week. So we'll start with you, Gio. Who do you have for trending up?
Trending up, I got to go Hubert Davis and the North Carolina Tar Heels. Like I said, that win against Michigan was incredibly impressive. And when you go ahead and take a look at North Carolina's schedule, they struggled a little bit. They dropped one against Purdue in the Hall of Fame tip-off, which Purdue's a very good team. And then they dropped one to Tennessee and really got mopped by Tennessee, who, by the way, just ended up losing to Texas Tech as well in the Jimmy V Classic. So Tennessee's kind of fallen off now as well. But, to where they started to how they've progressed and kind of come together as a team and gotten better, I think that's what stands out the most. You beat Michigan, and then you go absolutely dominate Georgia Tech. And not that Georgia Tech's good. I just think that they're a team that's trending up. And they kind of started, maybe UNC is going to be a disappointment. They're not the same without Roy Williams. It's going to take Hubert Davis a little bit, and it still might, but they're treading up. They're going in the right direction. And to be quite honest, they're one of the only teams in the ACC that had 2 wins in a row as well. So, Hubert Davis and the Heels are definitely on the right track.
David, you mentioned this player earlier and mentioned how you were going to talk about him some more. So who is your trending up for this week?
Yeah, I have NC State's Darian Sebron. He's second in the ACC in points per game, and he's really stood out. He's only behind Michael DeVoe. He's averaging 20.4 points per game. But he's also averaging 10.6 rebounds, too. I mean, this is a guy that can do it all. And with Manny Bates, who was NC State's rim protector, ACC Defender of the Year candidate, probably would have won it. Insane shot blocker. He's out for the season with an injury. So he has kind of been the guy that has had to step up, and he has. And he had 39 points in their 4 overtime win over Nebraska in the Big Ten ACC Challenge. He's really talented. He's shooting 55% from the floor. He kind of just does it all. Averages 3 assists a game too. So he's really been fun to watch, because every single time the ball's in his hands, he's going to do something fun with it.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to trending down, Gio, we have a team that was picked by one of the ACC analysts to be at the top of the ACC at the end of the year. Who is your trending down?
My trending down is the Virginia Tech Hokies, just because of where we thought that they were going to be. I mean, they were picked to be a top 5 team in the ACC when it was all said and done, and you start 0-1 in the ACC, and not only do you start 0-1 in the ACC, you lose by 19 points to Wake Forest. And then besides that, kind of the disappointment of going to Brooklyn and walking away 0-2. Memphis was definitely a team that we knew that, that was going to be a hard game to win. No way to spin it. They're a good team. They're an athletic team. They got, obviously, Imani Bates, who's the number 1 recruit, and they also have a fantastic, really young team with great recruits on there. Penny Hardaway is doing a great job recruiting that squad at Memphis. So, you knew that was going to be a hard game, and the Hokies played well. They just let that one get away late. But the struggles to score against Xavier and kind of how that game played out, and then you go and lose by 20. And some of the games have been closer than they should have been. I just think that the Hokies have been a little bit of a disappointment. Don't get me wrong, it's incredibly early, and kind of piggybacking off of the Hokies just being a disappointment and getting into the specifics, Storm Murphy's kind of been a disappointment, and they need better, and that's why he's on the graphic. They need better production out of the point guard position. Now, Sean Padula and Storm Murphy split minutes yesterday against Cornell, 20 apiece, and I think Padula played actually really, really well. Really excited to see, what else he can do. And the season is so young for Virginia Tech, and this is a team that's going to figure it out. They very well could finish top 5 in the ACC, but at this moment in time, they're kind of treading down, considering they've lost a handful out of the last 5 or 6 games.
And for you, David, another ACC team that's been a disappointment this year, well coached, but haven't really been able to figure it out on the floor.
Yeah, Florida State, coached by Leonard Hamilton, one of the longest tenured coaches in the conference. And this is a Florida State team under Leonard Hamilton that's always been really tough to beat because they've got so much size, because he recruits so well. And this year, they just have not, been – they've got a couple key players that have returned, but they just haven't been able to do much. They got wiped by Purdue in the Big Ten AC Challenge. And like what we already mentioned earlier, Purdue's probably the number 1 team in the country. But they also lost to Syracuse, who Gio already talked about how poor the Orange have been this season. And they were 4 for 30 from 3 in that game. They just haven't seemed to be able to figure it out, figure out the rotation. Florida State's always a team that has been able to have multiple guys that can step up and score. And, they've got some talent like Anthony Polite, but just in general, it's a younger team, and it just feels like this Florida State team is kind of lost right now. And, it's not going to get any easier when they get into ACC play. But I'm interested to watch just because of how good Florida State has been under Leonard Hamilton, especially in the past couple of years. They're usually top of the ACC 1 or 2. They won the they were ACC regular season champions back in 2019-20. So this is a Florida State program that has high expectations, but so far this season just has really, really underperformed.
Yeah, definitely. We'll wrap that one up and move on to power rankings, which is going to be a complete surprise because I have not seen the way that either of you have ranked. So I'm not sure which one we're going to throw up first. Gio, all right, let's get some insight into your power rankings for the week.
I totally wanted to come out and just mess with everybody and every single week put Syracuse at the top of the power rankings, but it's just they don't deserve it, to be honest with you. So my power rankings sit North Carolina number 1, and a lot of people are probably going to think, why not Duke? And, well, Duke just lost to Ohio State, and they didn't play an ACC game. And power rankings aren't standings. Power rankings are kind of who's trending up, who's trending down, who's been impressive as of late, what's happening right now. And I think UNC's that team. They've won 2 in a row right now, and one of them's a conference game against Georgia Tech where they absolutely wiped the floor with the Yellow Jackets, and that was on the road in Atlanta. And then we talked about it so many times already today, but an impressive win against Michigan. So that's why I got the Heels 1. Obviously, Duke number 2, and those two are honestly so interchangeable. Duke's been the best team in the country right up there with Purdue, plain and simple. Bonchero's incredible. Just a player that honestly is the level of Zion Williamson in terms of what he can do on the floor. Not the same kind of player, but I'm just saying by taking the nation by storm like that, and he wasn't he was highly recruited, don't get me wrong, but he wasn't that big Michael Jordan-like story coming in, and he has just been the best player in college basketball. They completely redeemed themselves and replenished from where they were last year at this point, and it's Coach K's last year, so there's a lot at stake right now for Duke. And Wake Forest, a team that sits at 8-1, just beat the Hokies in their first conference game by 19 points. How could you not have Wake up there? NC State has been pretty good as well. I put Syracuse in there just because, and this is kind of where it gets into the rough patch, where it's like all these teams are so interchangeable at this point in the power rankings that how do you mix and match them? I'd say anywhere between 4 and 12. All those teams are kind of one and the same in a lot of different ways. So Syracuse, just because they did have a win in the ACC Big Ten Challenge against Indiana, and then they did go have a really impressive game at Florida State in Tallahassee, a game in which they dominated and then kind of tried to give it away at the end, and so many times almost gave it to Florida State. Florida State had a really good comeback, still won that game. Then Virginia Tech, they've still been a really good team. through the non-conference despite the losses to teams that are arguably better than them, right? I mean, Memphis and Xavier were ranked in the top 25. So Virginia Tech in there, especially after a good win last night against Cornell by 33. Then you got Louisville, Florida State, Miami, Boston College, Georgia Tech, Clemson. I mean, literally they're all the same when you look at their records, 3 losses, and they're so interchangeable there. And here's where it gets tough. Pitt, I put Pitt ahead of UVA because honestly, they should have won that game. And they were so close to winning that game. And I know UVA won it, but it was a game dominated by Pitt. It went back and forth. But, Pitt should have won that game. I think Pitt's the better basketball team. I think they're both struggling. I just think they're the better basketball team. Then I have UVA, which I'm sure Tech fans will have a smile on their face to see them towards the bottom of the power rankings. But then I have UVA. I do think right now they're the second worst team in the ACC, especially with a loss to JMU. And before last night, they were sitting at like 7 on my power rankings, and then I had to call Malcolm and tell him I needed to change my power rankings graphic and have UVA at the bottom just because you lost to JMU last night and then barely beat Pitt, and they've just struggled completely. And then Notre Dame, I think Notre Dame's bottom of the barrel in the ACC. They've lost 5 games, and it's just tough. That Golden Blues gonna have a long year.
I think it's so funny to look at your rankings and have Notre Dame be the last team in the conference when they're a team that is in the ACC for every single sport except for football. So they're obviously not contributing really basketball-wise. If they were in the ACC for football, they finished, 5th in the last rankings? So they would do a lot more football-wise than they're doing basketball. They would be the number
1 team in the ACC if they were here for football.
Yes, so Notre Dame, if you're out there, we want you in our conference.
We do?
That's a take for another day.
I don't know if I want them on my conference.
A tangent for another day. Maybe we'll talk about that next week. But want to flip it on over to David's rankings and get kind of some of your insight into why you rank the way that you did.
Yeah, so you guys can see the graphic on the screen behind me. So I have, and you'll notice, I have Cookout Tray 1A. And my thought process was Duke is number 1, and Duke is clearly the number 1 team in the ACC. They're carrying the ACC. They had a really impressive win against Gonzaga a couple weeks ago. Cookout Tray is 1A because that is you know what you're gonna get. Like it's great, it's consistent, lets you down every once in a while maybe, but a little bit soggy fries here and there. But for the most part, it's very, very solid. Yes. Everything else, nobody knows what's gonna happen. So after that, I've got North Carolina, who I think is the second best team in the ACC, but has struggled a little bit early. Picked it up since. Louisville and NC State, we talked about their game a couple, just last week. That was really, really close. Wake Forest 5 beat Virginia Tech, who I have 6. And then 7 through 10 is kind of where it's a little bit of a toss-up. But Miami might not have the best team, but they've gotten results, and they've played really, really well. Cameron McGusty and Isaiah Wong make for a really, really difficult combination to defend. Georgia Tech has been interesting to watch. They beat Lipscomb last night, but they won the ACC last year because they had Jose Alvarado, and they lost him, and now they've got Jordan Usher, they've got Michael DeVoe, but they haven't really been able to they haven't been as good as their peak, which is probably last year. Then I've got Syracuse and Florida State, and simply those 2 teams have been disappointing. After that, Boston College, Virginia, Clemson, Notre Dame, and Pitt. Boston College has won a lot of games. I think once we get to ACC schedule, Boston College is not going to be as good. Just because it's first year under Coach Earl, and they've got a little bit of talent, but it's a rebuilding year. Virginia has just been horrid, but I think they have a little bit of talent, and I think Tony Bennett, got to give him credit as a coach. I think if anybody can turn around, it's Tony Bennett. Clemson and Brad Brownell, they've been disappointing. I think they're one of the other teams that can also turn around because Brad Brownell's a pretty good coach. But at 14, I've got Notre Dame, and this is one of the most surprising things to me in the entire ACC. I think Virginia, Notre Dame, because the Fighting Irish, I had them 8th, I think, 7th or 8th in my preseason ACC media poll that I submitted. Because they returned Prentice Hub, they returned Dane Goodwin, they returned Nate Leshevsky, they added Paul Atkinson Jr. They've got a good core, but they have played horribly over the first 7, 8, 9 games. And then Pitt, I think Pitt's just the bottom of the barrel. It's a rebuilding year for Jeff Capel and company, and it's going to be really difficult for them to kind of right the ship this year because you can't go out and get guys in the transfer portal mid-season. They lost 4 starters from last year's team, and then the 5th one was arrested this year. So very, very tough for the teams that are at the bottom. But, I think it's kind of just Duke and a Cookout Trey and everybody else.
I'll say this, 2 things actually. First of all, I had never even heard of Cookout in my entire life, obviously being from up north.
Party foul.
It has quickly become probably one of my favorite things about being a student at Virginia Tech. And then, I think Notre Dame this year is going to struggle, but watch out for them next year. They got a decent recruiting class coming in, and they got a kid, J.J. Starling, who looks like he's going to be a stud for Notre Dame next year. And this is kind of a different pipeline, a different tangent. And I'm a little biased because he played at a high school in Syracuse, Baldwinsville, and played against my high school a lot. I called games that he played in. And he quickly left to go play prep school basketball. I want to say at La Lumiere. So, big name. And then obviously he goes to Notre Dame. But this kid is an elite basketball player. I mean, he was a 4-star recruit, and Notre Dame's getting a dog. So I think that Notre Dame with him and some of the other recruits that they're bringing in are going to be a little bit better in years to come.
Well, I'm sure those power rankings are going to change next week because there's a lot of great basketball games this weekend. It was so hard to choose which ones we're going to talk about. We'll touch on 7 of them. First one coming up this Friday night as the Louisville Cardinals take on the 8-1 DePaul. Don't know their mascot, but they take on DePaul.
Blue Demons.
And they could give them some trouble.
Yeah, I think DePaul, they haven't really played a very difficult schedule, but this is a Louisville team, like I mentioned before. Chris Mack, he's kind of piecing things together, and they lost a lot of pieces from last year's team that was really good. But they've got some talented guys like Jalen Withers and Malik Williams. I think Louisville's very front court heavy, but this is a team that's piecing it together. I think this is going to be a game. It's a should-win game for Louisville, but it's a game like one of the games we'll talk about later, a game for Virginia Tech against Dayton. It's a should-win game, but it's going to, it could be a big challenge depending on how Louisville comes out of the gate.
The thing I'm excited about for this game is it's a little throwback Big East days matchup. DePaul and Louisville spent some time in the Big East together, believe it or not, in that kind of span between where Syracuse and Louisville both departed for the ACC. So there's history there, a little bit of a throwback rivalry. So that's kind of what gets me going about it. It's a little bit nostalgic to see those two face off again. So, DePaul just hasn't had the same kind of resume as Louisville has. Louisville's challenged themselves a lot more, both in the non-conference and being an ACC team. And DePaul's a team that's in the lower echelon of the Big East. So I just think this is a game that, Louisville has a chance to go out and get an impressive win. They can win by 20, but it is a game that Louisville should win pretty handedly.
Now, this Saturday slate is really intriguing. You got Syracuse at Georgetown, Kentucky at Notre Dame, and the unbeaten LSU Tigers taking on the defending ACC champions in Georgia Tech. David, which of these matchups stands out to you the most?
Honestly, I was going to say Kentucky Notre Dame, but Notre Dame is so poor that I think I'm going to have to go. I assume Gio's going to choose a Syracuse game because he likes Syracuse. So I'm going to go LSU Georgia Tech.
Yep.
Will Wade's bunch is always frustrating to play against, and I think Josh Pastner is a solid coach down in Atlanta. But it's been interesting now after having such a great team last year, having to adjust and to bring new guys in and to keep that culture where it is. Because they were the best team in the ACC last year. I mean, they won the tournament, and they won the regular season, but the tournament, as we know, is a gauntlet, and they were really, really talented. And now all of a sudden, they're without 2 of their most important players from last year, and like I said, they've got Jordan Usher, they got Michael DeVoe, but this is a big challenge for them. They got LSU at home. This is a tough test because you're challenging yourself. And I don't know if this is really a must-win game, but it's definitely one where you can kind of see where your benchmark is, where you're going to perform with the ACC schedule right on the corner.
Yeah, Gio, we may know which game you're most excited about. Is it the Syracuse at Georgetown game?
No, it's the Kentucky and no, I'm just kidding. It's Syracuse. It's Syracuse Georgetown, and obviously this is a podcast about the ACC, but this is up there with Carolina Duke as one of the best rivalries in college basketball. The unfortunate thing is it doesn't mean anything anymore. They're not in the same conference. They're not in the Big East anymore. They're not playing for a conference game. They're not going to meet each other at the Garden at the end of the year in the Big East semifinal or the Big East championship. And to be quite honest, both programs have completely fallen from grace from where they were. But you look historically back in the 80s and the 90s and literally throughout all that time in history, this is a fantastic rivalry, and that's the exciting thing about it. It's great that they still play every single year, though it might not mean as much. This year they're playing at the Capital One Arena in D.C. instead of up at the Carrier Dome. So, of course you're excited for this one. I think, but looking across, the Saturday slate, this is the best game as far as level of competition goes. I think Kentucky's going to wipe the floor with Notre Dame. And I think that LSU is going to take care of business against Georgia Tech pretty convincingly as well. So I think as far as you want a close game that, is going to go down to the wire, it's Syracuse-Georgetown, and it has. Ever since Syracuse left the ACC and they've continued to play, you've had 3 overtime games. You've had games go right down to the wire. No matter how good or bad Syracuse or Georgetown is, it means something, right? Patrick Ewing's the head coach at Georgetown who played against Jim Boeheim when Jim Boeheim was in his early coaching days. Like, there's just so much rich history there. We just had Big Mike Thompson pass away last year, so there's history there with that as well, and I'm sure they'll honor him in D.C. So I just think this is going to be the closest game Saturday. It has nothing to do with being a Syracuse fan. It's the historic rivalry compared to the other teams don't have as much meaning in their matchups, and the fact that it has the makings to be a great one.
Lastly, on Sunday, we got Florida State at South Carolina, Virginia Tech at Dayton, and Purdue at NC State. And for Virginia Tech specifically, this would be a great win to redeem themselves from that almost 30-point loss to Dayton back in 2019.
Yeah, well, I think this is it's a huge opportunity for Virginia Tech to continue getting back on the right track. We all saw the Hokies beat Cornell on Wednesday night. But this is a Dayton team that they're lengthy, and we've seen what happens when Virginia Tech's played longer teams this year. And you're playing on the road. Virginia Tech's 2-0 in road environments this season, and you mentioned losing by Dayton down in Maui in 2019, the day after Tech upset number 3 Michigan State. This is a really good opportunity for Virginia Tech to play good defense, to emphasize, I guess, togetherness and connectivity, something that Mike Young mentioned after the game last night. I'm really interested. I will be in Dayton at the game covering it for Tech Sideline, but I will be really interested to watch how Virginia Tech plays as a team. When you go on the road, it's always a little bit more difficult, but especially after a tough game against Wake Forest. They bounced back well against Cornell, but now it's the real deal, a much better team against Dayton, who lost last night to SMU. So SMU's, Dayton's coming off a loss, so maybe a little bit more motivation there for the Flyers.
Isn't it a shame that the 1 year Dayton was incredibly good with Obi Toppin, they didn't get to play in the NCAA tournament? I mean, they were a 1 seed in that tournament, but that's kind of a side note. But I'm calling this a must-win for Virginia Tech, and it's going to be a tough one to do. But you're getting to a point here where you've already lost 2 non-conference games. And when you look at the NCAA tournament and the bubble and strength of schedules there, but when you look at resume and what they need to get into the NCAA tournament as a bubble team, first of all, 3 non-conference losses wouldn't be very good, but you're putting the pressure on yourself in ACC play significantly. And you need to give yourself some leeway to lose a couple of ACC games that you probably shouldn't. And they already did. And it's not that they shouldn't have lost to Wake Forest, but it was at home, and it was by almost 20 points. It's not like they lost by 3 points. So I'm calling it a must-win on Saturday for Virginia Tech. They have to go down there and prove that they can, like David said, play against a longer team, a taller team, a physical team that's well-coached in a tough environment. Dayton fans are going to come show out for that game. No doubt in my mind about it. They always do. It's why they go ahead and send the preludes to the NCAA tournament there, and they play the play-in games there, the first 4. It's a great arena. It's a great atmosphere, and it's a mecca of basketball, a small mecca of basketball in Dayton, Ohio. But it's a must-win for the Hokies. You just have to cement that one, you can hang there with the big boys, even though Dayton's really not a big boys, that you can be a better team, show that you can be an aggressor, and have some hope coming into this stretch, the end of the non-conference, and into ACC play, because they dropped a dud big time on Saturday against Wake Forest.
Well, it's unfortunate that this Virginia Tech game and the Purdue-NC State game are both at 2 p.m. because I'm really looking forward to watching the highlights, I guess, of this Purdue-NC State game and seeing how the Wolfpack do against this Purdue team, who is probably one of or the best in the country.
Yeah, I think Purdue's the best team in the country, and I talked about Darian Sebron earlier. He's really, really talented. I don't know if NC State has enough. I doubt it, because this is such a talented Purdue team, but NC State, this is a good benchmark for them as well. You just seeing this is the type of team in Purdue that you'll play when you run up against a Duke team later this year. So for NC State, this is going to be a really good test to see how it matches up with one of the nation's best. And I'm more so just disappointed I'm not going to get a chance to watch Purdue, because that team is really fun to watch.
I'm curious if when their break is in Raleigh at NC State and when they go home, December 12th, if it was here, Tech fans or Tech students would still be here. But regardless, it's going to be a great atmosphere. But if the students are there, it'll be even better. I mean, you got the one of the top-ranked teams in the country coming to town. It's going to be exciting for NC State, a huge opportunity in front of them. Do I think they win it? No. I think Purdue pulls away, but I think they can hang in there through the first half and make things a little bit interesting. It's just exciting to see a big team go to a place like NC State and see that place get alive. It's going to be pretty cool.
Well, now that we've previewed the games, let's do some speed round picks. This I will chime in on so that we can have a little friendly competition from week to week. I believe we have some graphics with the picks as well. There we go. All right, let's get your thoughts, guys.
Yeah, I'll go first. I'm going Louisville to take down DePaul. Again, I just think Louisville's the better team, and they're starting to really figure things out this season. Had a really good win against NC State a couple of days ago. Chris Mack has had this program at some really good heights and some middle-of-the-pack type situations as well in his tenure so far at Louisville. I think Louisville is definitely going to find themselves in that top 5 of the mud, you could say, the thick of the ACC. So I'm going Louisville. Syracuse versus Georgetown. I can't not pick the Cuse, right? I think that everybody back home would disown me if I were to pick Georgetown to beat Syracuse. So I'm going the Orange. I just think that Patrick Ewing doesn't have the greatest team right now. Not that Syracuse is that much better, but Georgetown has really fallen off in previous years as of late. So I think Syracuse is the better team in that situation, despite being on the road. Florida State, I'm going over South Carolina. I just think that Florida State at this point, the better team than South Carolina, though they've struggled, an opportunity to get a Power 5 win. Kentucky over Notre Dame, and I don't even think it'll be close. I'm going LSU over Georgia Tech, and I don't think that one will be all that close either. Purdue over NC State. And then I'm going, this is a coin toss, but I was going Dayton. But I also made that pick before they played Cornell last night and really started to figure things out. And looked good. I mean, they had 7 guys scoring double figures last night. That's impressive to do. That's not easy to do. Keve dropped 16. David Gasson was great. Sean Padula was the biggest takeaway for me. He was impressive. And Darius Maddox was a second leading scorer with 14 points. So the Hokies really bounced back yesterday. How good is Cornell? I'm not sure, but they did speed up the tempo big time. They played that fast pace and forced the Hokies to play fast basketball. Hokies shot incredibly well from the field, 54% from the field, and they shot 52% from downtown. But I still picked Dayton, and I'm still going to stand by it because it's a tough road atmosphere. It's a tough place to play. And, what I saw against Virginia Tech on Saturday, that's how they've been playing as of late, besides last night, and that's how they played it in Brooklyn, and it's kind of been that same rut, and I don't know if they can dig themselves out of it, especially because Cornell was a smaller team, and now you're playing a team that's bigger than you once again, and Keve's going to have a hard matchup down low once again, and he's going to struggle to finish, and I think the biggest thing comes down to the size, so as much as people are going to hate me for it, I went Dayton.
And for you, David?
Yeah, I think Louisville wins. I think Chris Mack and company will get off to a hot start against DePaul. This is a game I think they'll be challenged a little bit, but if they play to their capabilities, I think they'll be good. I've got Syracuse against Georgetown. I think this is kind of a rejuvenating game. It should be for Buddy Boeheim. He has not played well as of late. He's one of the top players in the ACC, but he struggled lately, especially from behind the arc,
especially against Villanova.
Yeah, which is very uncharacteristic of him. So I think this will be, especially in a rivalry game. I'm sure he knows how much it means to. He grew up watching his dad coach this rivalry, so I think he'll know how much this means. And I think Syracuse gets the win over Georgetown. I've got Kentucky against Notre Dame. I don't think it'll be very close. I would say probably at least 15, 20 points for the Wildcats, simply because Notre Dame, even though Notre Dame's playing at home, the Irish just have not been good this year. I've got Florida State beating South Carolina. I think this is – I know I had Florida State as my trending down pick, but I think Florida State, this is a game – South Carolina's okay. This is a challenge. You're testing yourself. And this is a chance for you to kind of work out some of the kinks before ACC schedule comes upon you. And I think the Seminoles and Leonard Hamilton get it done. I've got LSU against Georgia Tech. I think this one will be pretty close. Gio said he didn't think it was going to be close at all. I think Georgia Tech will hang around for a while, but I've got the Tigers winning.
I think I don't mean to interrupt. I think LSU's one of the slept-on teams in the SEC. Like, I think LSU's a pretty decent basketball squad. I wouldn't be surprised if they won that game by 15 points.
Yeah, well, I just think Georgia Tech is decent. I've got LSU still, but I think it'll be I think it'll end up being like 7, 8, 9 points by the end of it. But I think LSU pulls away late. Purdue, NC State. I've got the Boilermakers. I think this one. I think NC State will try to hang around, but just won't be able to, just because Purdue is just so good. And then Tech Dayton, I've got Tech. I know both of you guys picked Dayton, but I think the Hokies have a really good opportunity to get a win on the road in a what's going to be a crazy atmosphere environment. And I think most importantly, this team has experienced a little bit of a rut. Sometimes you have a bit of a rut patch, and this is not – that Wake Forest game is not a good example of how Virginia Tech is going to play the rest of the season. And I think Mike Young, especially after the win against Cornell, has this group rejuvenated, and they're going to come back with a win. Katie, what are your picks?
Thank you for teeing me up, David. So I did make some picks as well. I don't have any explanations for them, hardly at all. I'm just now realizing that I only picked one ACC team out of all of these games, which is Syracuse, and I believe both of you guys picked them as well. Yeah. So, but I got DePaul in the first game. I have Kentucky, LSU, South Carolina, Dayton, and Purdue. So we'll check back in with that next week and see how the standings look between the three of us. But
she made it interesting, big time.
Well, that is going to do it for the first episode of Around the ACC. Want to thank everybody on set today. David Cunningham, managing editor of TechSideline.com. You can find him at TheRealDCunna on Twitter. Giovanni Heater, he is at GeoHeater on Twitter. Malcolm Stewart, our wonderful producer, and I am Katie Adams, your host, signing off on Around the ACC. Enjoy the games this week. We'll catch you next week.